Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I'm doing something a little different, something I've only done a couple of times. I'm going to be talking about UFO crashes. In fact, the title of today's episode is When UFOs Crash, 7 Shocking Cases. And yes, UFOs do crash. I think we have enough reports to say for sure that this does happen. You might ask why? Because I think there is a conception that ETs are so advanced, how could they possibly crash? And I think the reason we see so many cases is because our own gravitational magnetic field lines on our planet are very unstable right now especially, but have been for the last 50 or 100 years. And you can look up the science on this. This absolutely is verifiable. And if you study the UFO accounts, the contactee reports in particular, you will see that contactees have been told that ETs fly their craft by harnessing the magnetic gravitational field lines of our planet, which are very changeable, very unstable. And accidents do happen even to those with very advanced technology. So I think that's why we see UFO crashes. Now I've got 7 cases for you today coming from all over the world, 5 outside of the United States and 2 within the United States. So the locations of these events include Australia, Estonia, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Venezuela, and 2 within the United States, including New Mexico and Ohio. So what's really interesting about cases like these is they are far more numerous, I think, than most people realize. It's certainly not just the Roswell UFO crash of 1947 or the other famous cases like the Aztec UFO crash in New Mexico, or the Paradise Valley, Arizona crash, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Those are the really well-known ones. Those are the ones we all know about. But if you look into this, you will see that there are a lot more cases. And I am guessing that the vast majority of cases we never hear about at all because they have been effectively covered up. The 7 I'm covering for you today, I'd be surprised if you heard of these. I'm sure that there's some of them you've never heard of. Maybe a couple are pretty well known if you're really into this subject. But yeah, I think you're going to be absolutely surprised to find that you've never heard of some of these cases. What I like about this particular aspect of ufology is it is one of the cutting edges of UFO research. I think there's 3 main areas that have the greatest potential for change. One is definitely contactee accounts, people who are taken on board, people who have face-to-face encounters with humanoids. So much potential there to learn about ETs, who they are, where they come from, why they're here, what they have to teach us. So that's definitely a very important aspect of UFO research. I think the disclosure movement is definitely gaining steam, and we're getting definite strides forward in getting some truth and transparency with this subject. And I think we're going to see great changes there for sure. But this particular aspect of UFO crashes, UFO crash retrievals, reverse engineering, this I think has absolute potential to change everything. It would be a complete game changer. All bets are off. Because if we can get our whole hands on this evidence, it would be absolutely conclusive. There would be no more mystery. There would be no more argument about who these guys are, what's the nature of the extraterrestrial phenomena. I think we're dealing with extraterrestrials, people like us. And I think these cases absolutely demonstrate that. It's ironic because all of these UFO crash cases are purely anecdotal, resting solely on eyewitness testimony. But here we have the absolute most conclusive, hands down, all bets are off evidence. If we could get our hands on these craft, this technology, these bodies, we would know for sure what's going on. And by all accounts, our governments all across the world 100% know what's going on and have these craft and have these bodies and are reverse engineering it. So that makes this subject so important because it has the potential to change everything. So let's get started. The first case I'd like to cover today I call UFO crash in Venezuela. This one occurred apparently around 1952 in the Amazonian jungle of Venezuela. It is a single witness case, but it was very, very thoroughly investigated, and it's really quite unusual. And there's a lot of details in this one that I think argue for its veracity. Again, this case rests on the testimony of a single witness, but its credibility is vouched for by multiple witnesses, and the case was thoroughly investigated by UFO researchers. It first appeared in an article by Joël Maynard in the French magazine Lumière dans la Nuit, Lights in the Night. That was in the September-October 1995 issue number 335. The title of the article was A UFO Crash with Corpses in Venezuela in the Early 1950s. But it was also reprinted in the Flying Saucer Review, the autumn 1999 issue. The witness is known only by his initials, JP. It is in some ways a bizarre story, but again it does contain details that align with other UFO cases. The witness, JP, was a pastry cook and a stonemason. He lived in Galicia, Spain, but around 1951-52, thereabouts, moved to Caracas, Venezuela, where he had a relative. He had adventure in his heart, and he hoped to search for gold in the gold-rich Amazonian jungle. So he and 5 others, after arriving there, gathered together food, gear, animals, weapons, and all kinds of supplies. And about 500 kilometers southwest of Caracas, they entered the jungle. Now, this expedition turned out to be a disastrous failure and really ended up as a fight for survival. In fact, some of their party did not survive, and morale quickly dropped in the group because they found no gold whatsoever. They ultimately decided to split up, so JP and 1 other man went on alone, and they, of course, ran out of food and gear, so the other man decided to head back while JP continued on alone. So now he's all alone in the Amazonian jungle. His estimated location is south of Merida, deep in the heart of the Amazon forest in Venezuela. So he's hacking his way through the jungle with a machete when he noticed something glittering and metallic some distance away at the foot of a volcanic mountain. This was some miles away. And thinking it might be the precious gold he had been hoping to find, he spent the next few days making his way towards the spot, and finally reaching the area, he was shocked to see something else entirely. A 25 to 30 foot wide metallic, disc-shaped craft with a 6-foot wide dome on top. He said the craft was emitting a kind of beep-beep noise. It lay at a slight angle on the terrain. It appeared to be resting on what looked like tripod landing gear. Now, at the time, JP had never heard of UFOs or extraterrestrials, and he assumed that this must be an advanced military craft. And he was intrigued, so he set up camp nearby and waited to see if the military would show up. But some days later, they still hadn't shown up. This beeping noise stopped, so JP decided to make a closer inspection. He walked right up to it with his gun and touched the tip of his rifle to the craft, and was amazed to find that his gun kind of stuck to it, as if the craft was a powerful magnet. So he pulled that off. He climbed around to the other side, higher up against the slope, and this is when he noticed an opening into the craft with a small ladder, a metallic ladder leading down to the ground. And at the base of this ladder was the body of a small being. The body was about 3.5 feet long, it had a very large head, kind of yellowish skin. The eyes were covered with a mask of some kind, a little technological device of some kind, but he could see that the being had almost no nose, just 2 holes for nostrils, very thin lips. It had very long arms with hands ending in 6 fingers. It was wearing a torn 1-piece garment that exposed the body. Now, per the report on this case, the being was well endowed. Probably not true. That actually comes from another witness who took the notes on this case, but we'll talk more about that later. At any rate, removing the mask, JP saw that this being's eyes were very large, almond-shaped, and wrapped right around the side of the head. Very much the typical grays we hear about today. Again, the idea of aliens was completely foreign to him, so he's looking at this thing and wondering if it might be some kind of devil or something. But seeing that it was clearly dead, he realized that no, this had once been a living being, and whatever it was definitely not human. It wasn't until much later that he realized that this must have been an extraterrestrial. So he decided to bury the body out of respect. Afterwards, he examined the mask that had been on this ET's face, placed it over his own eyes. During the day, he said he could see nothing through it. It was just a blur. But at night, he was shocked to see that it gathered enough light in the darkness so that he could see, quote, an infinity of stars. So this sounds kind of like night vision goggles, which according to Colonel Corso was one of the technologies that was retrieved from the Roswell UFO crash. So you can take that report for what it is. At any rate, JP instantly realized the value of this object and decided to keep it as proof of his experience. His next step was to inspect the craft more closely. He tried to scratch it or dent it, but of course was unable to do so. So he crawled around it and was amazed to see a transparent porthole on the dome section. So he climbed up and peered through the porthole, and he saw 3 additional identical looking little men sitting in seats facing a very simple console. All 3 of them were lifeless. He finally summoned the courage to go inside the opening. He said he saw a kind of like spiral staircase leading up to the dome on top, but was never able to get inside of it. He found no opening into it. He saw that the floor looked almost transparent. It was dark in there, so he had to use a flashlight, and he saw what he described as something like bones beneath it. He didn't know what it was, but he was very spooked, so he exited the craft and decided to leave the area, hoping to return later better equipped and with more people. The only item from the craft that he brought with him was this alleged alien mask or night vision goggles, whatever it was. He finally found his way back to Caracas, Venezuela. He tried sharing his story with various people in the hopes of getting supplies and money for another expedition, but most who heard his story were skeptical. So finally, JP revealed that he could prove his story, that he had an artifact. As he spoke about it, there was an American in the bar where he was talking about it, perhaps a CIA agent. That's JP's suspicion, because 2 days later, after talking about this alleged alien artifact, JP returned to his residence and found his room ransacked. Nothing else was stolen, the place was turned over, and only the mask was missing, only these goggles. So JP by now learned about the idea of extraterrestrials and UFOs, was finally able to understand his experience. He really wanted to return to the site, but now he had no proof, no way to get funds, and ultimately he ended up moving back to Spain in the hopes of returning one day. He never did. He found that people were still not receptive to his story. Many other events happened to him which prevented him returning, including being jailed for not having his identity papers. He joined the French army hoping to meet someone who would listen, and he did. He met a French officer who not only took JP's story seriously, but wrote down a complete report. Unfortunately, this officer sat on the report for 20 years. Can't blame him, what's he going to do with it? But he only revealed it when he heard it mentioned at a UFO lecture in France. And this is what led to the story being researched by Joël Ménard, the French researcher, and his colleagues. So Joël Ménard and others finally managed to track down the witness, and in 1977 got the full story from him firsthand. By then he was old and ill, but as Joël Ménard writes, the immediate impression made on both of us by him was good. There was nothing of the weird or way out about JP, nor of the visionary fanatic. He just appeared to be simply what he was, a retired stonemason. Now JP said that he had suffered ill health ever since his Venezuelan expedition. He also said that the discovery, quote, poisoned his life. He believes that the craft is still probably there, waiting to be rediscovered. Joel Maynard said that JP's current testimony and memory matched precisely with the testimony recorded by the French officer, with the one exception of the ET being allegedly well endowed. JP did not recall saying that or even remembering that detail, so perhaps that was an addition by the French officer. I don't know, it's an odd detail, not sure what to make of it, but Joel Maynard was absolutely convinced the case was genuine. As he says, and I quote, "My colleague and I have had much discussion about the personality of JP. We weren't dealing with a madman, nor, so we think, a fraudster. His account ran true in every respect. The man didn't drink. He seemed well integrated in his milieu. What was dominant throughout in his behavior was a vast lassitude, a certain sort of disillusioned, disappointed sadness." So yeah, they got plenty character witnesses who vouched for his integrity and honesty, but he was a broken man. Now Gordon Creighton, editor of the Flying Saucer Review, was also convinced that the case was genuine. As he writes, quote, "As for my opinion about this fascinating story, my considered answer must be that I think it is very, very probably totally true." And he cites the many details that match up with modern-day accounts to bolster this opinion and the fact that JP, his character, and the other people who vouched for his character seem to be entirely honest. How about that? Crazy to think that this craft might still be out there just waiting to be discovered. And yeah, a single witness case, that's not unusual with these UFO crash accounts. And I think if the researchers Joel Maynard, the French researcher, and Gordon Creighton, the UK researcher, hadn't endorsed this particular case, I might not have covered it. But they're good researchers, I think highly respected. And there's details in this account that really match up with not only other UFO crash retrieval accounts, but modern-day contactee accounts, such as the description that the man gave of these humanoids, which sounds like grays to me. Such a shame he didn't get more artifacts from this craft, or the stuff he did get, he wasn't able to keep hold of it. You can see it kind of ruined his life, so my heart goes out to him for sure, as it does to a lot of other people who find themselves embroiled in these kinds of events. So let's move to the next case. This one is so fascinating to me. Really interesting aspects to this one, which I call UFO Crash in New Mexico. This apparently occurred in 1952 in an undisclosed location in the New Mexico deserts of course, New Mexico. What I like about this case is it's got a lot of details that we hear in modern-day contactee accounts in terms of the description of the ETs and the interior of the craft, but also it's a multiple witness case with witnesses who are widely spread, don't know each other, and are reporting the exact same details. And there's another really fascinating aspect to this case, which I'll cover after we hear all the details. This case comes from pioneering UFO crash retrieval expert Leonard Stringfield. You can't talk about UFO crash retrievals without mentioning Leonard. He's the go-to guy. This case was published in his book, UFO Crash Retrievals, The Complete Investigation Status Reports 1 through 7. Again, this is a multiple witness case involving a mysterious film which apparently depicts a UFO crash retrieval incident that took place at an undisclosed location in the New Mexico desert around 1952. The first witness, the primary one, is known only as Mr. T.E., a military radar specialist. In the spring of 1953, this witness, age 20, was stationed at Fort Monmouth in New Jersey. At that time, he held a secret security clearance. Now, without any warning, any preamble, this witness and a small select group of other military radar specialists were summoned to view a special 16mm film at the base theater. Now, they received no briefing at all, but were just sat down and told to view this film. The lights were turned off, and the film began. The film had no credits, no titles, no music, no sound. It had the usual flaws and scratches often seen in early, grainy Army photography. What Mr. T.E. and the others saw left him speechless. The film showed, sitting on the desert landscape, a silver disc-shaped object with a dome on top. At the bottom was an open hatchway. The craft was partially embedded in the desert sandy soil. That was the first scene. There was a sudden cut, and the next scene showed 10 to 15 military personnel dressed in fatigues with no identification patches standing around the craft, which the witness believed was disabled. Seeing the men around the craft allowed the witness to estimate its size, which he measured as about 15 to 20 feet wide, with the hatch, the open hatch, being about 2.5 feet wide and 3 feet high. Then there was another cut, and the movie now displayed a brief glimpse of the interior of this craft. There were muted pastel colors, which were not very clear in the grainy, overexposed film. There was not much else inside except a panel with a few simple levers. There was yet another cut, and the fourth scene showed the interior of an army tent. Inside the tent were 2 tables. One table had 2 small, alien-looking dead bodies on it, and the other table had only one. And as Leonard Stringfield says, and I quote, Mr. T.E. said the bodies appeared small by human standard, and most notable were the heads, all looking alike, and all being large compared to their body sizes. They looked mongoloid, he thought, with small noses, mouths, and eyes that were shut. He didn't recall seeing ears or hair. The skin, he said, was leathery and ashen in color. Each wore a tight-fitting suit in a pastel color. Yellow was mentioned. Now at this point the movie abruptly ended, still with no credits, which was unlike other films the witness had seen depicting military operations. In fact, the witness said that neither he nor the other men viewing the film spoke at all during its airing. They all just watched in shock and confusion. Once the film was over, the officer in charge turned on the lights and told the men,
"Think about the movie. Don't relate its contents to anyone."
And that was it. There was no other explanation by the officer in charge. But the implication was that this was a real event. The witness obeyed the instructions and told nobody, not even his wife. Shortly after viewing the movie, the witness said that he heard from a couple of top security officers on the base that a UFO had crashed in New Mexico 1 year earlier, in 1952, and that it had been recovered along with its occupants. Then, 2 weeks later, Mr. T.E. was approached by an intelligence officer on the base who had a message for him. The intelligence officer told him, quote, "Forget the movie you saw. It was a hoax." At the time Mr. Stringfield investigated the case, Mr. T.E. was a civilian holding a high technical position, and he says he does not believe the movie was a hoax. And he explained that the reasoning behind his opinion is that it would have been very difficult and costly, even for a major Hollywood movie studio, to make the alien bodies look so real, even for a makeshift amateur film. And for what reason, he added. As the witness says, the 5-minute-long movie was certainly not a Walt Disney production. It was probably shot by an inexperienced cameraman, because it was full of scratches and had poor coloring and texture. So the witness told Leonard Stringfield that at the time he viewed the film, he had zero interest in UFOs, nor does he currently follow the subject. But he does wonder why they showed it to him, and if it was in some way in any relation to his being a radar specialist. He later learned, however, that he was not the only one who saw this film. As Leonard Stringfield says, years later, he met an old Army acquaintance who was also a radar specialist. To Mr. T.E.'s surprise, he learned from this man that he too had seen the same film at another base under the same similar hush-hush conditions. So Leonard Stringfield published this report in his Status Report 1, Retrievals of the Third Kind, and this is when he learned, as a result of publishing this, that other officers had apparently seen this film. As Leonard says, as a result, word has come from far afield of others having knowledge of the secret movie film. Really interesting confirmation came from Joan Jeffers, who reports that an acquaintance of hers was an Air Force colonel. He requested anonymity. He was stationed at a radar facility in Maine, and he had told her about this film. And when she read Mr. T.E.'s report and Leonard Stringfield's status reports, she was absolutely struck by the similarities of the report she had heard from this Air Force colonel. So she was able to obtain confirmation from her colonel friend. After much persuading, he agreed to tell her what he remembered, and he says he saw this same film, apparently, in 1956, and describes the same details, this film having no credits. It just started abruptly, exactly as Mr. T.E. had described, and showed the same exact scenes. As Joan Jeffers says, the movie showed a circular metal silvery disc on the ground. The inside was well lit, of a light color, with smooth walls. The scene shifted to show at least 3 bodies lying on tables. The beings were short. All looked alike, and did not have any ears or hair. They all appeared to be dead. When I asked the color of their skin, the reply was ashen or gray. I asked the number of digits on their hands, and he held up 4 fingers, with his thumb out of sight. I asked if they did not have a thumb, and his response was affirmative. Next, I questioned him about the clothing, and he said it was, quote, pale green and yellow. Now the colonel evaded or refused to answer any other questions, saying only that he and the others who saw it with him did not discuss it, as it was military business, and you don't discuss military business, and that he believed he had been shown the film because it was a UFO that they had been tracking, which had crashed. He also intimated that he had considerable other inside information about UFOs, but absolutely refused to reveal any of it. Now, Leonard Stringfield did hear of other reports of people who apparently viewed this same film, but he was unable to confirm their testimonies. This was basically hearsay. But he finds the reports of this movie very believable, not only because of the consistency of the descriptions of the ET bodies from other similar cases, but because of the high credibility of those who viewed it. And as Leonard Stringfield says, I cannot believe that the movie used make-believe cadavers and was a trick on a select group of personnel holding the highest degree of security clearance. That sounds like a legit case to me. Again, we see the details described of the ET bodies in the craft, the same sort of details contactees described. Almost always contactees describe the interior of these craft as being very sparse, almost nothing in there. And we see that in this account. Even the description of the ET bodies, even the colors of their uniforms or the interior of the craft, all of this matches up. And this being a multiple witness case with witnesses who don't know each other and reporting the same details, there you go. I mean, it's hard to see how people could make something like this up and have it match so perfectly. But to me, the most interesting aspect of this case is that they are showing this film to all kinds of people. Apparently quite a few people, only a few have come forward. Why are they showing this film to these personnel, these military personnel? This comes up in a number of other cases of this kind, and it appears that this might be sort of a test run to see how people would react when they are confronted with this kind of information. Hard to say for sure, but I really wonder about it. Makes me wonder how many other witnesses there are who saw this particular film, where that craft is now, and what happened to these bodies, and so forth. It's infuriating to think how many of these cases there are that we never even hear about. All right, let's move to the next case. This subject gets me all riled up every time, because I think we deserve to know the truth. Here's another case, and I'm sure you haven't heard of this one. It's gotten pretty much zero publicity. No real investigation in it. Again, this is an anecdotal report. There are multiple witnesses, though only one has come forward. I call this one UFO Crash in Ohio. This one occurred in April 1977 in Xenia, Ohio, which by happenstance is not that far from Wright-Patterson. And if you know about UFOs, you probably know about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as being the location where a lot of crash retrievals, the hardware, the craft themselves, the bodies, are shipped to and studied. So that's apparently what happened in this case. I think you'll find it really amazing. This amazing case comes from Newfork, the National UFO Reporting Center. Again, the witness is anonymous, and the case has not been formally investigated. The reporting witness is the son of the primary witness. It is actually a multiple witness case involving the man's father, aunt, uncle, and cousins, so a total of at least 6 people. Around 8 p.m. one moonless evening in April 1977, that date is approximate, the 6 witnesses were outside their farmhouse on the outskirts of Xenia, Ohio, having an evening cookout. This was an activity they frequently enjoyed, and at some point during that evening, the darkness of the night was pierced by a brilliant glowing object that zoomed at high speed, very low over their heads, lighting up the area like daylight. The object was on a downward trajectory and had no sooner appeared when it crashed into a huge oak tree about 1,500 feet away alongside the road leading to the house. And as the reporting witness says, and I quote, "They all freaked out and ran inside the house. They first thought that the Soviets had launched nukes and World War III had started. After a while, when nothing else happened, my uncle went outside with a flashlight to investigate. He noticed a smell in the air and a really dense fog bank coming from the area of the oak tree. He walked closer and started to hear a sound which he likened to bacon frying in a skillet, which turned out to be the tree sap being boiled, which also explained the smell in the air. He tried to find the tree in the fog bank to make sure it wasn't on fire, and that's when he saw the lights that were pulsing around the edge of the saucer, like a heartbeat. I remember him saying it was 12 to 20 feet in diameter and circular. So seeing that the craft was definitely unusual, the man immediately ran in and called the Greene County Sheriff's Department, who agreed to send over a patrol car. Meanwhile, the family looked out the window of their farmhouse and were amazed to see, quote, tiny people moving around in the fog. Soon the policeman arrived and with the other man went outside, and they saw that this object was still lodged in the tree. And the officer said, I have no idea what this is. Now, per the uncle, the officer went to his cruiser and radioed dispatch to contact Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which by coincidence was located about 20 miles away to the west. The officer was contacted by dispatch and told that personnel from Wright-Patterson were on their way and to order everyone to stay inside the house, including the police officer, until they arrived. Shortly later, the Air Force arrived with a personnel van, a military car, and at least one double-axle flatbed truck with a mounted crane lift behind the cab. The military officers walked around with boxes that they later learned, the witnesses, were radiation detectors. And after some time, an Air Force officer came inside and delivered an explanation. Per the reporting witness, and I quote, an Air Force person came inside and told them,
Sorry, folks. It was just ball lightning.
There was a significant amount of radiation in the area and that it was not safe for them to stay. They were told that they would be put in a motel in Fairborn for the night and then brought back after 5 p.m. the next day. Of course, by then, all evidence of the crash was gone in terms of the bodies and the craft itself. Now, the reporting witness was 8 or 9 years old at the time, and all he remembers is, quote, sitting around the dining room table and listening to my uncle ranting and raving about what they saw. I remember him telling my dad that this was not ball lightning, and he knows it was a UFO, and the Air Force was recovering it. The next day, my dad and him went back after 5 p.m. Just them. My dad said the yard was trashed from the trucks around the tree. The tree was still standing, but was dead. And he said that they saw little tiny boot prints in the field next to the trees, and also military boot prints, like they were chasing or rounding them up. My aunt was so freaked out by the tiny people that she wouldn't return until Sunday. They ended up moving to Fairborn a few months after the event. I know this probably sounds too good to be true, but this is what I remember. In fact, it was 39 years after the incident in 2016 that the reporting witness did report this to Newfork, and he only did so after talking to his father and asking him about the event and having him describe it. And his father said, "Wow, I can't believe you remember that." It's such a shame that in so many of these cases, we never hear anything about them because the military comes in, scoops all the evidence up very quickly, and basically lies to the witnesses, threatens to the witnesses. Can you imagine this colonel telling this family, "Oh, that was just a fireball, pay no attention, nothing's here, and don't talk about it." It's a little ridiculous, honestly. Really such a shame. We very nearly did not hear about this case at all. Again, more indications that this is probably far more common than even UFO researchers know about. I have no idea how many cases like this there are, but I'm sure it's not just a few. So now let's move to the next case, which in some ways is remarkably similar in that this UFO strikes a tree. I call this next one UFO Crash in Australia. This one occurred, we know the exact date, February 7, 1980 in Stirling, Australia. This one is very well verified. Multiple witnesses, physical evidence. It has been thoroughly investigated by researchers. Even the police showed up. So there is no denying that something really profound happened with this case. This very unusual case occurred at the Glen Alta Stud Horse Farm, located on Old Carey Gully Road. This is just outside of Stirling, Australia. The case was investigated by Hori Aspinall, Jane Brooks, Dean Piovesan, and others. Those are all Australian UFO researchers. There is one primary witness by the name of Daryl Brown. Daryl was 21 years old at the time. He worked at the farm, and on this evening he was babysitting and watching over the property. It was around 9:50 p.m. on February 7, 1980, that the first signs of something unusual occurred when the two Great Danes outside on the property started howling. Daryl was watching TV at the time. Then he and the kids heard a loud crashing noise coming from outside. As Daryl says, and I quote, "I was lying on a bed in one of the second-story rooms watching television with the children when the two dogs outside started to howl in quite an eerie fashion. It was a sound I had never heard before. Less than a minute later, there was a tremendous crashing noise, and I thought a tree had fallen on the house. This seemed rather strange, as there was no wind that night. I raced to the window and looked out, but could see nothing in the darkness. Accompanied by the kids, and with torch in hand, I went downstairs to see what had happened. As soon as I opened the door, the dog raced inside and sat down, shivering and shaking. One of the dogs is a huge Great Dane that is not easily intimidated. I went around to one side of the house, but could find no sign of damage. As I was coming back, however, loud creaking and cracking noises were plainly audible from the cypress pine that stands close to one side of the house. Now this cypress pine tree is a big one. It was first reported to stand about 210 feet tall. This is probably an exaggeration because later reports adjusted it down to about 120 feet. This is likely more accurate as these types of trees generally don't grow larger than 150 feet. It was too dark to see what was causing the noise, so we brought the kids back into the house and ventured outside with his torch, his flashlight, and shone it up into the massive tree, and was absolutely stunned at what he saw. About 60 to 90 feet up, about halfway up the tree, lodged in the branches, was a long yellowish craft of some kind, hemispherical in shape. And as Daryl says, I reckon it was about 8 meters in length. It looked very much like the hull of a boat. It was not making any noise, nor did it appear to be moving, though the branches were creaking under its weight. I raced inside and immediately phoned the police. Though I wasn't really terrified, I decided to play it safe and stayed there until they arrived. However, when the police phoned back to say they couldn't find the place, I went up to the front gate to show them the way down. So the police arrived shortly later. They shone their spotlights up into the tree, but by then the object was gone. After an hour of searching, the police just left. But the next day, the property was a beehive of activity as media and UFO researchers showed up to investigate. Researchers Hori Aspinall and Dean Piovesan climbed up to the midsection of the tree to inspect and take photographs of the damage. And they found that a branch about 3 feet in circumference had been smashed and splintered. It showed no evidence of being unhealthy and just dropping off. It was a healthy branch. In fact, that whole section of the tree showed damage with deep gouges in the trunk, and 4 branches below it were broken. It also appeared that the roots of the tree itself were somewhat loosened, and it appeared to the investigators as if the trunk had been almost twisted around full circle. Weirdly, there was little or no debris on the ground itself. Investigators did test the area for radiation, which came out negative. However, and wisely, they used an infrared detector as well, which showed that the tree was emitting unusually high amounts of heat, far higher than any other trees in the area. And there were other unusual effects. The horses in the stalls were very much spooked after the incident, and the manure in the horses' stable was an unusual black color that morning, when normally it's a golden brown. Also strange, one of the rugs on a horse in the field had been unbuckled and placed by the gate by someone or something, so that's a bit of a mystery. Another unusual thing was that amateur radio operators in nearby Adelaide reported a transmission blackout on that evening at that time. Finally, for 2 days after this incident, the dogs refused to go anywhere near this tree. Now, there was some speculation that the damage was due to natural causes, though nobody could pinpoint any cause. In other words, this branch didn't fall because it was dead, and frankly, it wasn't even there. So what happened to this branch? Now, the witness, Daryl, reports that he definitely saw something unnatural up there. Prior to this incident, he did not believe in UFOs. As he says, "Though I believe that there is life out there somewhere in the universe, I have never given any great credence to all of the stories you hear about UFOs." Naturally, he does admit that after this incident, he is having second thoughts. Now, there is some really interesting possible confirmation of this incident involving a very unusual UFO encounter which occurred on that same night, slightly earlier, in the South Australian town of Aldate. This is only about 3 miles from the incident. That's close enough to think that these 2 incidents might be related. Given what the 2 witnesses report, the connection seems undeniable. Because again, it was on that same night at 9:30 p.m., this is 20 minutes prior to the apparent crash, that Rob Tyndale called his twin brother Phil to come outside and check this out. So it was Rob who first saw this bright yellow object, quote, bobbing around, and he called out his brother Phil. They're both 10 years old, and sure enough, this yellow object was hovering and moving around above the trees about a half-mile away. And they watched it for a few minutes when a second, slightly larger object appeared. The larger object was emitting a red light, and it zoomed up at high speed to the yellow object, stopped and reversed its course, and then repeated the action, quote, as if to prompt a reaction. Now the yellow craft then took off with the other object in pursuit. The yellow object would stop suddenly, zigzag, change directions instantly, covering great distances in a split second. They did notice that the smaller yellow object would sometimes stop in mid-flight and would shake back and forth, quote, as if caught by some invisible force, and then it would dart away. Both objects made no noise whatsoever. So they watched this for about 15 minutes when finally the yellow craft moved off behind the hill, followed by the other object. Now, Phil's brother, Rob Tyndale, does confirm this testimony, saying, quote, certainly there were 2 lights. One appeared to be chasing the other. They both dipped below the horizon. It was a very memorable thing. So amazing. The most interesting aspect for me about this case is the witnesses who saw these two UFOs flying around. They disappear over the horizon. Minutes later, apparently, they crash at another location. So there's absolute confirmation there, or corroboration. It's like these two UFOs, whoever was piloting them, were getting a little too wild, having a good time, and one slipped up and had an accident. This is technically not a UFO crash retrieval in terms of the government coming in and scooping this up. Thankfully, the ETs got there first and rescued their own man, and I'm glad about it. I think our government has enough of these craft, and they're certainly not going to show us, so they don't need any more. Man, oh man, how many cases are there like this that we haven't heard about? Drives me crazy thinking about it. But an amazing case that definitely deserves to be well known. All right, let's move to Estonia now. This case you may have heard. This did get some publicity. It's super interesting. I call this one UFO Crash in Estonia. This one, I'm not going to say occurred in 1984 because we don't know when it occurred. But in 1984, this is when information about this case really started to come out. This one occurred in Tallinn, Estonia. But by all accounts, this is a crash, apparently, that occurred thousands upon thousands of years ago. This is certainly what the evidence is showing us. And I like this case because it does involve a number of witnesses. I was able to verify the names of some of these scientists involved in this case. These are legit scientists. They did exist. Their specialties are absolutely verifiable. You can look them up. This is a fascinating case on many levels. The primary source for this case is Russian ufologist Paul Stonehill. The information for this segment comes from an article titled "The Reported Discovery of a Buried UFO in Estonia." This was published by Gordon Creighton in the summer 1998 issue of Flying Saucer Review, of which Gordon Creighton is the editor. Now it appears that the actual crash date is much older, but information started to come out around 1984, though some sources say 1969. It was also published in the now defunct website abovetopsecret.com. But according to researcher Paul Stonehill, he says that in 1984, Soviet geologist Nikolai Nikolaevich Sochevanov was given a piece of dense silvery metallic material by an inventor friend who told him that the piece of metal had been retrieved from a farm outside of Tallinn, Estonia. Now, per the account given to Nikolai, workers were digging a well on the property and had dug down about 9 to 10 feet when they hit upon something solid and metallic. So they dug deeper, and they saw that the metal object was the very edge of a much larger metallic plate-shaped object buried in the ground. At the edge, it was only about a half-inch thick. Nevertheless, they tried to drill it, and their drill was not able to penetrate the metal. So they brought another drill with a compressor to the site, and reportedly were able to break off a piece of the metal plate and sent it off to 2 different scientific laboratories in Tallinn, Estonia. The results of the analyses were completely contradictory, with one saying the metal was nothing but cast iron, but the other saying that it was composed of a complicated titanium alloy, which included the presence of gallium and germanium. You can look up those elements. It's pretty interesting. So this prompted further studies, and the metal was then sent to the Moscow Institute of Physical Engineering, the United States Institute for Raw Mineral Metals, and reportedly to the Russian laboratory VIAM, which translates to the United Institute of Aviation Materials. Now these labs, according to the report, showed that the metal, which had a silver color, was very dense. 2 of the Soviet scientists, both metallurgical experts who studied the sample, per Nikolai, quote, had no doubt whatever as regarding the extraterrestrial origin of the artifact. In fact, one scientist, Mr. Kishkin, wrote, "The use of such alloys is unknown in aviation technology. Alloys of this kind must be very resistant to heat and possess the correct resistance to withstand being boiled in acid mixtures of any concentration whatsoever. In other words, the alloys had been subjected to every known test. None of the known laboratories could produce such an alloy, and that the metal was not part of a meteorite, nor was it of terrestrial origin. One scientist, Herbert Wieding, believed conclusively that the object was artificial in origin. Another scientist, Ernest Parve, who transported a sample of the object, reportedly died of cancer shortly after handling the sample. Also, there's a report that one person who handled the sample said it gave him an electric shock. Others reported it being very cold or hot. Russian UFO researcher Marina Popovich reportedly went to the site and confirmed the presence of the object. Now, I was not able to confirm any of these details, but hearing the results of these analyses, Nikolai Nikolaevich Sochevanov went to the site and determined, apparently using dowsing, that the object was 45 feet in diameter with an estimated weight of 200 tons, 13 feet high in the center, and thinning towards the edges. It appeared to be lying at a 35-degree angle in the ground. 1/3 of the alleged craft was located close to the farmhouse at a depth of about 9 to 12 feet, and the other side, tilted downward, was at a depth of 47 feet. Now, reportedly, there were magnetic anomalies measured in the vicinity of the object. Here's where it gets even more interesting, because per the geologists who studied this, the terrain of this location is morainal. This means that it was deposited by glaciers, which led them to conclude that the object could be as old as 10,000 years. Now, reportedly, this object was located at Hobeku's 34 in Tallinn, Estonia, with the owner of the property being a man by the name of Virgo Neat. Now, according to one source, he died of a stroke shortly after this strange object was discovered. Reportedly, Nikolai sent a full report to the Soviet military. The report was taken seriously, and Nikolai was told that further studies should be undertaken and that any publicity of this matter was absolutely verboten, forbidden. The military wanted the object excavated, but apparently there was a problem with funding this event. A year passed and the company that was put in charge of the excavation, Volna, failed to complete the project. Apparently they ran into all kinds of problems. When they tried to remove the object, it would bury itself deeper, again unconfirmed. But eventually the owners of the property became tired of the constant visits to their property. Neighbors were becoming suspicious, and reportedly this object was never excavated. In fact, Estonia regained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, so apparently the whole matter was dropped or is now out of Russian hands. So whether or not the alleged craft still remains there is a matter of speculation and conjecture. And in fact, Nikolai Sochevanov has since passed away, so it's not likely that this mystery will be solved anytime soon. That's a fairly well verified case. I think it's authentic. I really do. Yes, it is sparse on details. It's hard to find information on this case. And how weird is it that this craft could still be there, buried in this person's yard? I don't know. We haven't heard any more information on it. And would we if the governments went in there and scooped it up? Probably not. So it might not still be there. But it could be. It's very odd. And it's interesting to me how the scientists who really studied this determined that, yes, this had to have been there for thousands of years, given that this was buried so deeply underground. A fascinating case. And again, makes you wonder how many other cases, how many other craft there are buried somewhere out there or lying in the jungle that we don't know about and are just waiting to be discovered. Amazing. All right, let's move on to Mexico this time. I call this one, obviously, UFO crash in Mexico. This one occurred around 1989 in Santa Rosalia, Mexico. This is technically a single witness case, though there were a bunch of people there. Only one has come forward. It's a fascinating case, and there's little details in it that I think really speak to its veracity. The sole witness in this case is Mexican physician Dr. Rafael Lara Palmeros, now a UFO researcher, apparently because of what he experienced. And again, there's not much detail to it, but it does apparently involve multiple witnesses. The account appears in the Flying Saucer Review Winter 2000 issue in an article by Gordon Creighton titled Doctor Saw Crashed UFO and Small Corpses in Mexico in 1989. Now, per Dr. Palmero, in 1989, he and two companions, an engineer and an architect, were at an electric plant at the city of Santa Rosalia in southern Mexico. And I think it's this one because that's really the only electric plant there. You can see this image here. When they stumbled upon what appears to be a UFO crash retrieval operation complete with alien bodies. They were drawn to the scene by the presence of considerable military equipment and activity, including helicopters, jeeps, and a large group of high-ranking Mexican Army officers. They did also notice that some of the officers there were not Mexican, but were fair-haired and blonde, so presumably Americans. That was his impression. So they were all assembled around a large, almost house-sized, silver-gray, spherical-shaped craft. The craft had no markings, no lights, just one large, squarish porthole at the midsection. The craft looked very smooth, and in fact had an almost rubber or plastic texture. But lying next to the craft were two apparently alien bodies, each the size of a small child, about 4 feet high. They were burned badly. Their skin appeared to be bluish, perhaps, Dr. Palmero thought, because of the burned condition. They wore one-piece metallic jumpsuits that appeared to be visibly fused with their flesh due to having been burned so badly. Now, the witnesses were able to peer inside the porthole and saw that the inside of the craft was largely featureless, except for 2 empty seats. One reason Dr. Palmeros may have been able to approach the site is that he was wearing a medical lab coat at the time. He says that the military officers did subject him and his 2 friends to close interrogations, but they ultimately agreed to let them stay and observe, but only from a distance and only after confiscating their cameras. Dr. Palmeros was not only deeply impressed by the scene, he was also impressed by the atmosphere of, quote, tremendous tension and nervousness, which was apparent among all the military officers there. He later learned that the public, including the media and newspapers, both at a regional and local level, were fed a bogus cover story that the silver gray sphere was nothing more than an ordinary marine buoy that had been washed up on the beach by the waves. Santa Rosalia is a coastal city, and the electric station lies directly on the coast. Now, Dr. Palmeros also learned that the original discoverer of the craft and the bodies was a local farmer by the name of Jose Renteria. There was some rumor that he had pulled the bodies out of the craft. So after learning the identity of this witness, Dr. Palmeros did his best to contact the man, but soon learned that the gentleman had disappeared and was untraceable. You want to know more about that case? I would love to speak to the witness, Dr. Palmeros. It's interesting to me how he kind of stumbled upon this incident, and because he was a doctor and wearing a lab coat, he didn't attract a whole lot of attention. I think they assumed that he was part of the crash retrieval team, and that allowed him to approach closely. Either way, after interrogating him, they let he and his friends watch from a distance. Of course, after they confiscated their cameras, so they had no physical evidence. It's interesting to me that this case was covered up in the way we hear about in other cases. People saying it's, just a normal aircraft crash, or in this case, a buoy that had washed in from the ocean, which it so clearly wasn't. One detail that really, to me, marked this as being a genuine case is that the doctor was able to look in through the window and saw that there was really nothing inside this craft. That is a very consistent detail in the onboard contactee reports, again, as I said earlier, but also in these crash retrieval reports. And again, the description of the ETs, that's very consistent. So many of these cases. It's insane. All right, Now let's move to the last and final case in this compilation. This one did get some publicity. You may have heard of it, but definitely deserves to be widely known. I call this one UFO Crash in Kazakhstan. I'm going to give you a twofer here. This is actually involving two separate UFO events in Kazakhstan. Both are equally fascinating. The first one occurred in August of 1991 in the Tian Shan Mountains, technically at the foot of the Tian Shan mountain range in Kazakhstan, a huge mountain range spreading over several countries. This case is amazing because it does involve a lot of witnesses, some really interesting physical evidence in terms of electromagnetic effects and physiological effects as well. As far as I know, there's only one witness who's come forward to talk about this. This could also be a case involving a reverse engineered craft, one that's our own. I don't know. You can make up your own minds about it after I just present the facts as we know them. Either way, incredibly fascinating. And the second case is also just mind-boggling. This very interesting case was first published in the magazine Evidencia OVNI, issue number 17, 1998, and was later reprinted in Flying Saucer Review, the summer 1999 issue. Per Gordon Creighton, there are several sources and multiple witnesses to this event, and he wrote about it in an article titled, "Did a Huge UFO Crash in Kazakhstan in 1991?" So reportedly, the main source is actually Russian ufologist Nikolai Subotin, director of the Russian UFO group RUFORS, who received it from a first-hand witness by the name of Emil Bachurin. So Emil, the primary witness, told Nikolai that he had been invited to the site along with a group of military officials. In fact, he included his handwritten sketch of the object, due to the fact that the people there found it impossible to photograph or videotape the object any closer than a distance of 1,500 feet because of intense radiation emanating from the object, which caused the film to be completely clouded. And in fact, it also damaged various equipment. Emil said that he himself suffered damage to his eyesight, and that others there said that their skin was burned by coming too close to this object. All the watches anyone wore stopped when they approached within 1,900 or so feet, which also showed a total absence of any magnetic field. This object was found at the base of the Tian Shan Mountains, a massive mountain range spanning several countries, including China, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and southeast Kazakhstan. The object itself was tubular shaped. It apparently cracked in half upon impact. There was a prominent skid mark showing that the craft had come down with some force before coming to a rest. Now, per Emil, there were some prominent symbols visible along the side of the craft. One end had two black stripes, the other had two darkened portholes, and per Emil, the object was, quote, absolutely enormous. They estimated the size was something along the lines of 2,000 feet by 390 feet. Military investigators first arrived on the scene in August of 1992, though it appeared to them that the craft had crashed earlier, perhaps in August or September of 1991. UFO researcher Grigor Zherakov, another member of the Russian UFO group, says that the first group of researchers not only were unable to get any photographs, after approaching to within 1,500 feet of the object, they too suffered radiation burns, and their equipment also suffered. Apparently at some point, an Mi-8 helicopter got too close to this object and crashed as a result. And as Grigor Zherakov, UFO researcher, writes, quote, the skid track of the craft along the ground is about 800 to 1,000 meters long and is clearly visible. It must also be completely visible from space. The craft's course was from due west to due east, flying on a very level trajectory. And if we are not mistaken, its size really is 620 meters long and 120 meters wide. And that is where the matter remains, at least for now. But as it turns out, it is not the only reported UFO crash in Kazakhstan. There is another equally dramatic, though perhaps not as well verified incident, which took place near Arkalik in the Turgay region of Kazakhstan. And this case comes from Russian journalist Tatyana Leonova. This was reported on the Anamalian.com website and elsewhere. Now, she said that the primary witness was a friend of her father's, and that's how she heard about it. The primary witness is a shepherd by the name of Sujimbe. One evening in June of 1979, he said he was awakened by a strange glow coming from above and not far away from his home. So curious, he saddled up a horse and rode several miles towards where he saw this glow. Arriving at the site, the glow was gone, but he did find the remains of a strange-looking aircraft. He first thought it was a plane or perhaps a crashed Soviet satellite, but upon closer inspection he saw that it was a silver disc, which appeared to be half buried in the ground. He was very reluctant to approach it and turned around to get away, and this is when he came upon a coal-black, egg-shaped object with an appearance of polished stone. So he started looking at this thing, and that's when it opened up and a tall humanoid emerged. Now the witness was frightened but also curious, and this figure immediately approached the shepherd, who could now see that this figure was not human, was certainly humanoid in form, very tall, thin arms and legs, large glittering eyes. The shepherd offered to take this apparent extraterrestrial home, and the invitation was accepted by the strange visitor. So, apparently, per the witness, this ET got on the horse and the shepherd walked him home. They went into their hut. They tried to feed their strange visitor. The visitor would not eat meat, but did eat the dried goat cheese balls and drank tea. The very next morning, military officers arrived on the scene, and the witness sensed that they were looking for this strange visitor, so he hid the ET in his hayloft. Officers asked the shepherd if he had seen anything strange the previous night, which he denied. But per this witness, the ET actually lived with him for 2 weeks. Never spoke, but apparently understood everything said to him, and did in fact interact with some of the other villagers. Now it was during this time that the father of Russian journalist Tatyana Leonova visited the man, and brought her along. She was then 9 years old. Her father was a veterinarian, so the shepherd, the primary witness, took him to meet the alien visitor, and Tatyana secretly spied on the meeting. She looked in through the stable windows and saw it. She said the figure had gray skin, a large head twice the size of a normal person, huge black eyes that covered most of its face, so apparently a gray. And the ET apparently left when more of its kind came and retrieved him. This was on June 26, 1979, that this ET suddenly disappeared. And it was the day before this, there was a widely viewed, well-authenticated sighting of a fireball-like object at Beryazka. This is near the city of Drzavinsk. This is about 60 miles away, and reportedly the location of a significant stockpile of Soviet nuclear weapons. That could be a factor here. But according to the report, which interestingly comes directly from UFO documents sneaked out from Russia by researcher George Knapp, a group of people were camping in the area, sitting around a campfire, when a group of 9-foot-tall ETs showed up. They were described as very thin, dark in color, lark pink shining eyes with white belts around their waists. There were about 20 children between ages of 10 and 14 who saw them. One of the witnesses was Svetlana Kovacheva. In fact, the witnesses were so frightened that they fled the area, and when they returned, the humanoids were gone. But the next day, strange rumbling noises were heard, and of course that was the day that the shepherd's ET left. So researchers are connecting these two incidents. Reportedly, this second incident caught the attention of the military as one of the witnesses, Sveta Kovacheva, was there. And she told her father about it, and he was a police chief, so he reported it to the military, who, along with KGB agents, interviewed Sveta and the other witnesses. So this incident was also reportedly published in Soviet magazines. It got quite a bit of attention. There was evidence that the ETs or something was there because reportedly a metal chair was found deeply depressed into the hard-packed ground, and there were several giant footprints in the hard-packed soil. So there you go, a couple of really interesting UFO crash incidents in Kazakhstan. That first craft was a pretty big one. Maybe it is our own. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it, leaning towards that being ET. But again, you can make up your own minds about it. And I wonder if it's still there. It's a lot of these crashes that people stumble upon are out there in some very remote location. So perhaps a lot of these are discovered by pure accident. But amazing to me, the evidence in that first case with the photography being all screwed up because they couldn't get near this craft because of the energy fields coming off of it, clouding up all the film, making people ill. Really, really interesting. And that second case, wow, can you imagine coming upon a UFO crash and seeing a live ET and communicating with it and having this whole almost relationship with it? And then it got to go back home, it looks like. Pretty well verified case, actually, particularly the second part of that second case. But again, I'm just reporting the facts as we know them. I'm not going to try to say that these cases are absolutely provable because they're not. They're purely anecdotal. And yes, there is some physical evidence here and there, but that almost always, as we've seen in this episode, gets scooped up, covered up. So this is incredibly frustrating. This is why I think this particular aspect of ufology is so hard to move forward. Because when people get their hands on hard evidence, that puts them in great danger. And we know people have lost their lives over this subject. This cover-up is no joke. So yeah, this particular aspect of ufology is so important because, as I said earlier, it has the potential to change everything. Here is the smoking gun evidence that can no longer be denied, that if we could get our hands on it in the public arena, has the potential to expand our knowledge in pretty much every field of science, whether it's chemistry, or metallurgy, or astronomy, or biology. And really beyond that, it would change everything in terms of history, education, business, economics, politics, religion. Everything would be turned up on its end, which may be one of the driving forces behind the cover-up. Honestly, I think really what the cover-up comes down to is greed, power, control, and the fact that the folks behind the cover-up do have this technology and are reverse engineering it and don't have our best interests in mind. Shame on them. I hope you guys are watching this. You should be on the right side of history. It's not too late because the ETs are out there. The time is coming when there is open official contact and, for that matter, disclosure because of one simple fact. ETs are out there and this subject is real. So sooner or later it's all going to come out. I don't think this cover-up is ever going to end voluntarily. I'll underline that. The only way our governments or the folks behind this cover-up, let's face it, it's not just governments. It's the cabal, it's the one percenter, it's the military-industrial complex, it's the insurance and banking and energy and pharmaceutical industry that are really behind this. The highest levels of the military, the intelligence agencies. That's where you look to see who's behind the cover-up. And they're not going to do it voluntarily. They will only release this information kicking and screaming, and only if it's to their benefit. The only way this will ever come out is if there's a huge leak somehow, if some insider finds a way to get this information out, or there's a complete and total revolution. I don't see it happening any other way. Just my 2 cents or 10 cents for inflation. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think it's a truly important subject, so I truly appreciate you guys watching. Hope you learned something. Hope you found it interesting. Till next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth, because it's out there. Most important of all, keep having fun, and I'll see you next time for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Signing off for now.